past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still, and I think my spaceship knows which way to go. Tell my wife I love her. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Lyrics Breakdown with me, David Bindon. Now today we're going to be looking at the song Space Oddity by David Bowie. I'm a professional songwriter, lyricist and vocalist. I'm a member of the Nashville Songwriters Association, and I want to use what I have learned, gained and been given to help you guys become the best songwriters you can be. To start this off, I want to talk about isolation. That sense of being utterly alone. I have an example, and it's about a boy who, when he was 5, got lost in London Zoo. That boy was me. I went with a friend and his family to London Zoo. We were looking at all the animals, I was excited, we were having fun. Then there was a bit of confusion and I ended up getting separated. And although there were thousands of people walking around, tons of people around me, I felt isolated. I felt utterly alone. And thoughts were going through my head such as, oh, they've already got the train home, they've left without me, I'm never going to see them, I'm never going to see my family, and all that fear that came into my head as a 5-year-old. But safe to say, it ended well. I was found by a lovely woman who took me to the visitor centre, and my friend and his family soon came to find me. Why am I talking about isolation? Well, David Bowie, in so many of his songs, focused on the idea of isolation. Now this shows particularly in this song. What we're going to do is focus on the last section of the song. I'll play it and then we'll go through it. Though I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still, and I think my spaceship knows which way to go. Tell my wife I love her very much, she knows. Ground control to Major Tom, your circuit's dead. There's something wrong, can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear? Am I floating round my tin can, far above the moon? Planet's Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do. So a little bit of background. Bowie was inspired by Space Odyssey, the film, and this is what led to Space Oddity, the song. Now this last section that I played is the part where things start to go wrong. The circuit's dead, there's something wrong, and ground control loses communication with Major Tom, and he's floating in space, he's isolated and alone. So the first line goes, though I'm past 100,000 miles, I'm feeling very still. So it's this contrast between this rocket ship shooting through the sky, 100,000 miles an hour, but he feels very still. So it's this contrast between a machine and humanity. Then he says, and I think my spaceship knows which way to go. So in essence, he doesn't. Things are beginning to sound a little bit concerning. And then he says, tell my wife I love her very much. And at this point, there's been this call and answer between ground control and Major Tom. So he says, tell my wife I love her very much. And ground control replies, she knows. And then they say, ground control to Major Tom, your circuit's dead, there's something wrong. And then they repeat, can you hear me, Major Tom? They repeat that 3 times. Now if they said that once, it would not have the same effect They say it 3 times, that repetition, which evokes that panic. They're losing communication. They can't hear him, but they're desperate to, so they keep repeating it. Then he goes to say that phrase again, but switches from ground control back to Major Tom. Ground control say, can you? And Major Tom cuts in with, here am I floating round my tin can. He's used this metaphor of tin can already in the song. Now, the tin can is interesting. He hasn't said spaceship, he said tin can. Now, tin cans, they're inanimate objects, they're not very important, and no one really gives them any notice. And he's likening his spaceship to that, almost as if it's just insignificant. It paints more than an image, it paints an emotion as well. Then he goes on to say, far above the moon, planet Earth is blue, and there's nothing I can do. So far above the moon, we can picture that, we can have an image, a perspective of what that might look like. Then planet Earth is blue. You have to be pretty far from the Earth to see it as blue. So he's used that to portray how far away he is. And the last line is, and there's nothing I can do. It's completely powerless, completely isolated. So it's actually really sad, a very, very sad song. So to recap, what Bowie used was contrast, for example, the 100,000 miles and being still in that. He used the call and answer from ground control to Major Tom. He used the repetition of, can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Can you hear me, Major Tom? Then he used the call and answer again, but this time really catching the listener's ear. Switching from here as in here with the ear, and here as in where you actually are. Switching that seamlessly was very, very clever. The emotion he painted with the tin can, the imagery with being far above the moon, and the world being blue, and he glued it together with the isolation and the vulnerability. Breaking this song down has been fun for me, and I hope that you guys can take it and use it in your own songs, have some fun with it, get creative. And if you enjoyed this, remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment, share it with a friend who you think might benefit from it, and most of all, peace and stay creative.